Hello, welcome to this second ReVeAL webinar. I'm Lucy Sadler, and the ReVeAL project is a Horizon 2020 project. It's called Regulating Vehicle Access for Improved Livability. So Urban Access Regulations, the horrible acronym UVARs, which includes low emission zones, zero emission zones, traffic limited zones, charging schemes, and space. In the ReVeAL, we also include spatial interventions, where the road space is given from vehicles to other users and other uses. ReVeAL is supporting 6 pilot cities, developing good practice UVARs, and in the process also validating and producing and then validating a development process and support toolkit, so it can help cities after our project develop their own good practice UVARs. Today, we've got Koos from Ghent giving an introduction and an explanation about our methods, and then illustrated by the 2 examples of Bielefeld by Lisa Marie and Jerusalem by Limard Levy. In terms of housekeeping, we're recording this session, so I think if you don't like that, you need to leave, I'm afraid. Questions and answers. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. And presentations, recording and question and answers will be available on our website after the session. And now it's over to Koos.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. And first of all, hi to all of you. And so hi to all of you, and good afternoon. Well, good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are situated now. But anyway, welcome to this ReVeAL webinar. My name is Koos Fransen. I'm a postdoc at the University of Ghent. I'm one of the partners for ReVeAL. And today I'd like to take you through our methodology for both our building blocks and UVAR development process that I will present to you today. First of all, I would like to start with a small introduction that's probably nothing new to all of you, but just to situate why we are doing this project. And like all of you know, in the post-World War II period, we had a strong rise of the automobile, the car, just specifically focusing on aspects such as speed, freedom, and status, as you can see on these very old posters. And this has led to the car becoming a commodity rather than a luxury good, so accessible for most of us, eventually resulting in a strong maximization of mobility, individual mobility. This map is a very interesting one, as for most of you are aware of the proverb, all roads lead to Rome. You can see that this actually is the case, and this is a map that shows all the roads that actually do lead to Rome in the bottom center in Italy. But it shows us that also our infrastructure has maximized into a strong focus on an individual's opportunities. But next to this maximization of mobility, it has also led to a wide range of externalities, as you can see on the top left, which is very common for where I live in the region of Flanders in Belgium, urban sprawl, but also aspects of safety, the typical white bicycles who are a sign of traffic crashes, also showing on the right top the very small yes, I will keep talking in the same direction, it will be better. Also the small bicycle paths next to larger roads, aspects of congestion, and also known to most of you, aspects of air pollution. So all of these have an impact on our built environment and more specifically on our cities. In addition, and this is something we need to add into our introduction to ReVeAL, in addition, it shows that COVID, so the recent and ongoing COVID crisis has had a strong impact on how we perceive mobility. First of all, in the way that mobility dropped during the recent lockdowns, but at the same time, in the way, and this is, as I learned last week, a specific European, typical European phenomenon, how there has been more roads who have been redeveloped into spaces for active types of mobility. As you can see on the top, on the bottom right, a pop-up cycling street just a few blocks away from where I'm sitting now was redeveloped into a cycling lane. And so basically in ReVeAL, we want to support cities in making the sustainable mobility transition, encountering the externalities that are resulting from car-dominant urban space. And we try to do this by applying two methodologies. Well, we apply more than two methodologies, but two methodologies that I will try to present to you today, in order to eventually support urban change management by assessing urban vehicle access regulations, and also by exploring and developing a standard range of urban mobility transition approaches for cities. And we do this in ReVeAL for 6 pilot cities: Helmond, Jerusalem, London, Padua, Vitoria-Gasteiz, and Bielefeld, and two of them will be presented later on. The first methodology that I will focus on, and you can see a graph or a picture on the right depicting this, is our building block methodology, where we show that actually a strategy consists of different smaller interventions or measures who are combined into a larger, robust strategy. And then the second part, which I will present today, is our UVAR development process, where we use these building blocks to support cities, our pilot cities, in their UVAR implementation and their sustainable urban transition. First of all, I would like to show the 8 case studies that we have examined in depth or in detail, that we use to construct a long list of building blocks, because we see that these strategies actually consist of smaller measures or building blocks. I will come back to this later, but first of all, I will present to you quickly our 8 case studies. The first one is the superblock model, which was implemented in Barcelona. And it's actually a strategy that focuses on freeing up public space for managing traffic and promoting active modes. The second one on the top is, oh, I will have to turn my camera off apparently, because the sound is not good. I hope this is better. The second one is the traffic circulation plan in Ghent, where through traffic is limited, and there's increased focus on sustainable transport modes in the aim of reducing the number of vehicles in the city center. Third one is also in Belgium, in Mechelen, is the cycling zone, which is a zone of 179 cycling streets, where cyclists have priority and motorized vehicles are guests in the public realm. The congestion charge in Milan, which is a charge for vehicles entering a certain zone in the city center during a certain time. The first one on the left, on the bottom, is the low emission zone in London, in the Greater London area, and the ultra low emission zone in the city center, where vehicles that do not meet low emission emission standards have to pay or are not allowed. Then we have the delivery regulation in La Rochelle, where deliveries are regulated within a time window. The second to last one is a low traffic zone in Bologna, with the idea of making it into a low emission zone over time. And the last one is a low emission zone, camera enforced low emission zone, with the idea of tightening it into a zero emission zone by 2025-2030 for the city of Amsterdam. So we used these 8 case studies, and we added more examples, worldwide examples, to end up with a long list of 70 options, which are aggregated into 26 building block categories. I will show later what these mean. And we can see that these smaller building blocks or measures are actually parts of larger strategies. So, for example, the school streets can be a part of a larger strategy of limiting traffic in a certain area of the city. A vehicle emission regulation, for example, can be part of a low emission strategy. Whereas, for example, a parklet can be a spatial intervention, a part of a larger, for example, a low traffic zone in a city. Now, when we look into all of our building block categories, so the aggregated categories, we can see that we have structured them into 3 measure fields: spatial interventions, the pricing measures, and the pathways to zero emission zones or low traffic zones. Now we also have one additional measure field which focuses on, which is a future options measure field, which focuses on well, measures that have not yet been, well, that are being tested in cities, but are maybe not that mainstream yet, or still have to become mainstream. And then we also have a 5th extra category, the category of the complementary measures, which are measures that actually counteract the often restricting character of our UVAR measures or our building blocks. Now, as I said, we have these different domains, so spatial interventions to complementary measures, all having different building block categories. But all of these building block categories are defined, if possible, into smaller building blocks, so of which we have 70 in total. For example, a school street can be a speed-regulated school street where cars are regulated up to a certain speed during certain times of the day. But it can also be a more strict form of school streets, such as, for example, a car-free school area, where a certain area around the school is actually restricted for traffic during certain times of the day. And for each of these building blocks, we have different options or different nuances that can be added, resulting in specific building blocks. So the next step that we did is we focused on all of our case studies, and we indicated which of those building blocks were actually used. For example, and I will use the example of Ghent, the circulation plan in Ghent, which is a very spatial strategy, UVAR strategy. And as you can see, it has a lot of these spatial interventions, building blocks, well, mixed into this strategy. The ones who are in bold font are the ones who are actually part of the strategy, or considered part of this circulation plan in Ghent. The ones who are not in bold but still visible are the ones who were already available in the city, but not really part of the strategy. And the ones who are grayed out are the ones that are not yet focused on in the city, both in the strategy that they had or just before. So what we see is that a lot of these spatial interventions are part of our circulation plan, which is mostly a spatial strategy. But at the same time, we can see that if we dive deeper into our other measure fields, we can also see that other aspects of our measure fields are also included in Ghent. So for example, if we look at pricing measures, we can see that a parking charge, a fixed parking charge, was also part of our circulation plan in Ghent. And for example, for our pathways to zero emission zones or low traffic zones, we can see that certain regulations, such as the regulations by trip purpose or a scheme timescale, were also part of our circulation plan in Ghent. So what we want to show here is that although our circulation plan in Ghent is a mostly spatial intervention, we can see that it also has aspects of our measure fields, other building blocks mixed into the scheme. So if you think back of the Lego-wise picture that I showed earlier, it's actually a combination of blocks, of building blocks that we combine into a robust strategy. And then very important, we also have our complementary measures. So if you focus on Ghent specifically, we can see that all of them are in one way or another introduced into our circulation plan strategy for Ghent. So for example, a economic incentive for mobility, or the option of, for example, trading in your old car for a mobility budget, or certain exemptions that were used, so people that could still enter such as, for example, people who lived in the city center who could still enter the circulation plan area, or other specific individual solutions related to the strategy. So basically what we see is we have this combination of building blocks, and we did this for all of our 8 case studies, and we not only focused on which building blocks were apparent, but we can also see that at the same time we indicated how they were implemented and how these specific building blocks were part of the broader strategy, from ideation phase of our strategy over the design, the implementation, up to the evaluation phase. Now, why is this important, and how did we use this in our next step, so our UVAR development process? It's because this implementation for our 8 case studies was already done. So we focused on the process that was taken to implement this specific strategy from beginning to end. But for our cities, our pilot cities in the project, we can see that there are different pathways possible to implementation. And their effects during the process can be different. And that's why we, in a second focus, we focus on a development process for UVAR, because we can see that strategic thinking helps to overcome certain limitations. And this is something that I will clarify a bit later on. But first of all, I want to also indicate that here a scenario, we saw this as a high-level plan that actually starts from a current city context and actually shows what a ReVeAL strategy could look like within that current city context. And a strategy here is a combination of different UVAR measures. So as we saw, for example, in the circulation plan of Ghent, a combination of different building blocks in order to end up with a robust and complete UVAR scheme. Now, how did we do this? There are different ways of achieving a similar aim, and that's why we defined a specific development process to actually show these different ways and try to envision what would happen if different ways were used. So the UVAR development process helps find the right one for your city. So it helps cities in supporting in choosing a certain scenario. It's very important to note that this development process is not linear, but we see it as a co-creative, dynamic, and interactive way where there are feedback loops between the different steps in the development process. In our strategy, or so in the first part, and this is something that has been going on for 2 years, so since the beginning of the project, we have been working together with cities and having talks on the strategy description. So the first part, or the first important part, is to show what decisions are already taken, and also what is still open or what is still under discussion. Where are different outcomes possible, and what scenarios can still support these outcomes. And it's important that by doing this, by having the strategy description for our pilot cities, we can show what the areas, challenges, chances, targets, and indicators for specific cities are, for a specific city are. Important here is that we have a difference in cities that are in an early phase versus cities that are in a later phase. So for example, cities in an early phase, in an ideation phase, they still have more degrees of freedom. So for example, we can think of different geographical areas to implement, or different phasing of the project, or different foci of the strategy, whereas cities in a later phase already have a quite fixed situation. So if we have to start from this fixed situation and see how our UVAR development process can help in guiding this process. So for example, if we know that we want to reach a certain goal, we can, for example, look at different building block combinations to reach that goal. Or we can look at different locations of intervention. So for example, if we have a specific intervention, it can maybe be extended onto other areas of the city. So again, what we did was, in the first part, is we looked at our pilot cities and we indicated which building blocks, and now you see the building block categories because it's more legible like this. But we looked at the different building blocks to see which ones were already existent in the city, but also to see which one were already planned or considered within the strategy that they were envisioning. So we did a similar exercise to see what was the specific focus of each of those cities. In the next step, we did what we call a co-creative UVAR Development Process workshop. And these workshops had the idea of supporting the pilot in the process by not just talking about the process, but also adding other stakeholders to the table, or other parts of the city or departments in the city to the table. And in this co-creation session, we did three things. The first one was to define what the city and stakeholders saw as the most interesting building blocks. So we presented our building block long list, and each participant had the option of selecting the most relevant building blocks. And then the selection was discussed. In the second part, we combined these building blocks into possible strategies to see actually if existing or new possible strategies were possible for the city. And in the third part, which is still an ongoing process, just as well, the broader picture of the UVAR development process, is envisioning what the possible impacts of strategies could be. And here it's still open if we would focus on a soft assessment for different strategies, or a more detailed assessment for one specific chosen strategy. Interesting here is, as I said, that this workshop was done with various stakeholders. So we also added people from mobility, planning, energy, environment departments, but we also added people working on communication, the local police, local businesses. And it was not fixed to one specific workshop, but there were options for a follow-up meeting. Eventually, the idea is that this all feeds into a ReVeAL toolkit, which we are currently working on. So in the end, we try to focus on specifically evaluating and focusing on policy support and policy decision support for the pilot city. This UVAR development process was tested within ReVeAL, and we saw that it had many similarities to the SUM process. So the idea is actually to provide a holistic method that could guide cities through implementation and evaluation of their UVAR strategy. It's important that we see this as feeding into the ReVeAL decision support tool, which is the follow-up of our project, that can also be used for cities outside of ReVeAL. So we use our pilot cities actually as a test case or a first case, which will provide input for how we can support other cities outside of ReVeAL. To conclude, I would like to give some conclusions for our workshop and some lessons learned or takeaways. First of all, some conclusions. The main conclusion is that it was found really useful by the pilot cities, and especially the part of bringing together different departments, not in a phase where one department brings their ideas and another department can react and resist those ideas, but actually now in a preliminary stage, in an early stage, already put everyone around the same table. So gathering the stakeholders and having this dialogue was key and was very, very interesting and very important. Interesting was also to see that many of the colleagues that joined were keen to continue this discussion. So we had some follow-up workshops for some of the cities, and other follow-up workshops are planned. We also saw that this building block methodology, so the ability of having different building blocks, combining them and adding them into a robust strategy, is more flexible than having a scenario roadmap. We also saw that participants evolved during the workshop. So in the beginning, they might be, for example, not really keen on certain implementations, but during the process, they actually evolved into certain aspects. making making it an exercise of supported unity in decision making. So having everybody, as I said before, around the same table. And we also saw that, and this is a quite logical solution as I'm reading it now, we also saw that a good preparation gave better outputs, so that we needed to prepare because the process is quite complex and extensive, and a good preparation gave us better outputs to use. Some final lessons learned for the UVAR process, development process, is that we saw that not translating the building block long list, which was presented in the beginning of the workshop, to the local context, rules and languages, for example, of the participating cities, actually resulted in a bit of a discussion point. So, for example, if a certain city, due to privacy regulations, cannot place any cameras, then we don't have to include building blocks that have cameras as part of the building block long list. We also saw that not all stakeholders have the same knowledge, views, and perspective. And we also saw that this reflected in how they did a soft impact assessment. This is a difficult and confusing task because there are many questions to ask when we try to look at different impacts. We also saw that the city's aims need to be clear. If they are not clear, it's difficult to focus on a specific combination of building blocks. That the selection of scenarios is different for different cities. So some cities might be in a very early stage and might be focused more on timing, whereas other cities might be in a further stage and might be focused, for example, more on possible complementary building blocks to what they are doing now. We also saw that, and this is also an obvious one, that making choices is often not easy. So a lot of people really liked a lot of the building blocks, but then when trying to combine them, we can see that it's difficult to have specific choices for specific building blocks. We also saw that it opened up other options. So people saw building blocks that they previously did not consider, but that might also help in attaining certain city aim that they were not thinking of before. And we also saw that it takes time having this UVAR development process. So we still see it as an ongoing process, which we continue to build on in the rest of the project review. And then finally, I would like to invite you to watch out for our ReVeAL UVAR Development Toolkit when it arrives. And you can do this by, for example, subscribing to our newsletter or visiting our website, CIVITAS ReVeAL. Thank you, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to hear them. And apologies for the sound, that was apparently not always great.
Yeah, thank you, Koos. And as Koos said, many apologies for the sound. We'll move over now to illustrating what Koos has been saying in terms of the process. That might take time, but also enables a better quality and a better, more involved UVAR development. Lisa Marie Brunner here is presenting on behalf of Bielefeld. Over to you, Marie. Lisa Marie. You need to unmute yourself, Lisa Marie.
Sorry, I forgot one button.
Just a trick.
Hi, welcome, and I'm happy to share some insights from the process in Bielefeld. Bielefeld is one of our pilot cities in ReVeAL. It's a medium-sized city in Germany, and we are looking at a pilot area in the Old Town. We call it the horseshoe area. The horseshoe, as you might be able to see on the picture, because of the shape of the area. This horseshoe area is part of the Old Town, and there's no public transport access in the area, so there's no bus going through the area, but it's very well connected through close by stations, and also what they call the mobility hub with very good connections to the other places. We have pedestrian zones in the area, a lot of shopping streets. It's very typical, it has very typical narrow streets with little space for pedestrians and cyclists in other areas, as you can see on the top picture. There's lots of on-street parking and parking surge traffic. We have high levels of through traffic in this area. And when we talk about UVAR, challenges are definitely to ensure the delivery and access for businesses and restaurants, because we have the little shopping streets in the area, the access to the private parking garages, and also the access for residents. As you can see on the pictures below, this topic of pedestrianization is already an old topic, and it's already happened in the 50s that the first areas and streets were pedestrianized. Yeah, so it was a very interesting process for us to accompany Bielefeld in this with this area. It has a very long history, and we met for very regular brainstorming and discussion meetings of discussing the possible building blocks in the old town, and also how to combine them with different complementary measures. It was already in the beginning of the project that we started this UVAR building process, not just with the scenario building. And as you can see, I just wanted to illustrate that we even went from different pilot areas, from the Jahnplatz, which is a close-by place, and moved to nearby places to discuss different options of implementing model filters and pedestrian zones, cycling streets, options like this, to also discuss these options then in the horseshoe area. And this is a final map we are looking at right now. This is what Bielefeld will also implement this summer as a pilot. And what was super important in this process is that we had meetings with the Bielefeld colleagues that have the local knowledge, and then the ReVeAL experts as the UVAR experts. Also super important was a parallel stakeholder process and the citizen consultation, which was the basis for deciding for the final measures that you can see on the map. This comprehensive stakeholder consultation in Bielefeld is actually a very good practice for a city involving their citizens and the stakeholders in the process. There were several large stakeholder meetings. Also, during COVID times, not so easy, so everything was online, of course. In these large stakeholder meetings, they also discussed the results of the citizen participation, which happened online through an online mapping tool, which you can see on the right. This was an open tool where everyone could provide input, ideas, concerns, any issues they're seeing, and they were evaluated and were the basis for deciding for measures this summer. I can't go into depth. It's a very interesting process that happened and are still happening in Bielefeld. If you're interested to hear more about it, we have a webinar in June on the 15th where we talk about user needs and public acceptance. And also we will talk about the process in Bielefeld in more detail. The scenario workshops were part of this whole building process. We had 3 workshops in total with different stakeholders, almost all from the city. So they were from transport, environmental planning, communication, digitalization, and urban planning. And out of these 3 workshops in which we discussed the different building blocks, we built 3 different scenarios. The first scenario is a temporary pilot, which will be implemented next month. It's a pilot that will be temporary until November, and then there will be an evaluation to then decide the final measures that will be implemented in 2022, also with construction. Everything that will be implemented this year will be just small construction and easily removable bollards, for example, through construction, fences, and signs. So this consists of, this scenario consists of model filters. Bielefeld has decided for some strategic spots where they can put up bollards and similar model filters. So then to create new pedestrian zones. Some of the car parking spaces will be reallocated to other usages. This was something that many citizens wanted, for example, more seating, more greening, more spaces to sit for restaurants, more bicycle parking. There will be some new one-way streets, some bicycle streets. They will implement new car sharing spots. And there will be exemptions because still in this phase, all residents and everyone can still access their private properties. So shop owners, residents, and so on can still come to their places and their houses, but maybe they have to go a different way because we have the new one-way streets. The second scenario and the third scenario, they are building on the first one. The second one is a horseshoe as a pedestrian zone with a zero emission delivery concept. We have shared spaces and pedestrian zones in there, cycling streets, and again, model filters, maybe this time as movable bollards. Maybe at some places flower pots would be enough. And this will be combined with a scheme time scale with a time window. So delivery vehicles, for example, could only access in certain times, maybe early in the morning. There would be differentiated costs for permits, depending on who the city would like to have in the area, more or less. And there would be regulation by trip purpose, for example, for logistics. And the aim would be zero emission logistics. As you can see in the citation down below, Bielefeld is aiming for zero emission logistics and is already working on a logistics hub with cargo bike delivery. There would be exemptions, and also some of the complementary measures could be walk to school campaigns and the promotion of alternatives. We also have a school in the area, so children couldn't be driven to school by their parents. The third scenario is the reallocation of all parking space. So this is similar to the first one again, but there would be no on-street parking anymore. So this could be relocated again into other usages to improve the quality of stay and space. And on top of this, we have the problem in this scenario that there are still private parking garages in this area. So in this scenario, we imagine that the city can buy the private parking garages and maybe also use them in different ways. Or there could be an option that the parking garages are accessible from other sides. On top of this, next to the parking relocation, we would have one-way streets and a low speed limit in this area. And again, the promotion and improvement of alternatives would be super important, especially for residents. These are our options that will be considered for the final implementation, but also this will be based on the evaluation after the first pilot implementation. Thank you, and also happy to answer any questions. And I also want to thank our Bielefeld colleagues, Oliver Spree and Olaf Lewald.
Great, thanks so much, Lisa Marie. We'll go straight over to Nimrod now in Jerusalem. And then we'll take questions at the end. Please remind people if you've got questions, put it in the chat or in the questions. And we'll do questions at the end after Nimrod. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nimrod Levy from Jerusalem Municipality. I would like first to ask you, if I can, to pray and to think and to even act for the peace of Jerusalem. The situation here is not quiet and not easy at all. I guess most of you know it from the news. But despite the situation, I can still sit here in my office in the municipality talking to you about ReVeAL Jerusalem UVAR Development Process. And this by itself gives hope and encouragement. So let's start. The city of Jerusalem is striving towards a zero emission zone in its city center. While this is a long-term goal, Jerusalem uses ReVeAL to embark on this journey with the implementation of a low emission zone enforced by license plate recognition technology. In the first stage, vehicles of 3.5 tons or larger and over the age of 12 years have been restricted from the low emission zone area throughout the entire 24 hours. The second stage of the low emission zone implementation has already been implemented with an expansion of the low emission zone to the entire area of the city. Furthermore, the definition of vehicles restricted to enter the low emission zone has also been tightened. At this point in time, the program has 4 main initiatives: continued implementation and expansion of the citywide low emission zone, logistic ultra low emission zone in the old city, NRMM polluting restriction, and public awareness. How we have benefited from the ReVeAL development process. ReVeAL as an opportunity for knowledge exchange and learning has been a critical factor in enabling the Jerusalem municipality to implement the low emission zones. By providing professional guidance in going from the pilot phase to the citywide LEZ, including the type of regulation, the extent of the regulation, the process of transition, and by exploring additional components of UVAR as we progress. This includes zero emission zone logistics, superblocks, restriction on non-road mobile machinery, NRMM, and historical city logistic ultra low emission zone, enforcement technologies, scenario buildings, and by enabling us to involve other colleagues through workshops and joint consultation. The initial formulation of the project and now the implementation is managed with clear goals, objectives, timelines, and deliverables. This has been very helpful in keeping the project on track, especially with the additional complexities of COVID-19. Being part of the international initiative within a consortium of cities supported by the European Union has greatly legitimized this program in the eyes of the public leadership of the city. The combination of working with the international professional team and colleagues linked with our local knowledge has been enriching, expanding our thinking and tools for action. It has given significant impetus to our program. And finally, the methodology of applying international knowledge to specific needs of our city and tailoring solutions through a multi-year interactive exchange has transformed the building blocks into operational tools for achieving the UVAR goals. What's next? A new multi-year program to reduce polluting emission from vehicles in Jerusalem is being prepared. The program is being prepared in cooperation with the City of Jerusalem, the Ministry for the Protection of the Environment, and the Ministry of Transportation. The program is being prepared by a team of experts in the fields of mobility, environment, economy, and law, with inputs from the ReVeAL Consortium and other cities in the European Union. Thank you for listening, and I'm open to questions.
Many thanks, Nimrod. And Nimrod's clarified what he's been able to be on the project. So we've been involved hands-on helping Jerusalem, and what we're preparing during the project, starting building on it, is the toolkits that will enable you to kind of be a Jerusalem pilot, like Jerusalem pilot, but with the remote tools beyond that, and the methodologies that we're using, and lots of the information. Some of the toolkits are already available in terms of the guidance notes. 2 of them are published and others are being published shortly. So keep an eye out for that. We have a question, 2 questions so far. One was a question or a comment about definition of UVARs. And UVARs is a phrase that's used quite a lot. And there are different definitions, which is why we are clarifying what we include here. It's regulating vehicle access. So one access regulation is a pedestrian zone, but also spatial interventions can be used sometimes to support traditional low emission zones, but also as an alternative. So it's interesting, the process with our cities, seeing people, seeing some of the cities think, oh, I wanted to do this, or maybe I'll consider these other things as well, and able to make a larger impact. I don't know if anybody else wants to, any of the other panelists want to follow up on that. And hopefully we get Nimrod back as well in a minute. Koos, Lisa Marie, do you want to follow up on that?
Well, maybe I can just add that indeed it's about well, measures, or if you see broader strategies that have an impact on different aspects. So it's not, it's on vehicles, but it can also have an indirect impact on vehicles. For example, if you focus on other modes of transport, the idea is that they will eventually also impact our modal split, for example, which will have an impact on the vehicles as well. So it's not because some of our measures are not specifically about reducing vehicles that they don't have an impact on this. So I think that's why we also want to see it as a broader aspect, and seeing these measures as part of a broader strategy, which often has different aims or different goals for a city, not only focusing on restricting vehicles, but also doing it because it brings us clean air or higher safety in cities. So yeah, basically that's why or what I want to add is that this definition is quite broad, and that it's not just about these specific vehicles. Yeah.
And the second question is also from Lucien Zardagan from Eurocities, and it's asking why would a city set up a strategy for an UVAR strategy when an UVAR measure might be considered part of a SUMP in an integrated way? And what would be the need for an UVAR strategy beside a SUMP strategy? And I think it comes down to a lot of the things in terminology. We've been struggling with terminology. We call it a scenario building, but then that's confusing. So we're calling it an UVAR strategy or UVAR development rather than a whole sump. You can't do the whole sump thing at once, so it's focusing on the UVAR part. Koos, do you want to take it on a bit more?
Yeah, no, I maybe just wanted to add that we see it as a complementary aspect, and also not all cities have a sump, so it's also a possible process for cities who are not specifically don't have a sump or are not planning on having one. So I think this is also an important aspect, and the idea is that it actually brings options to cities which they can look into. So I think this is the main important aspect, that it's additional. Yeah, I don't know if it fully answers your question, and I think it's a good question, and I think it's something we also have to think about as well. And maybe it's a question that we should ask our cities instead of answering it ourselves, how it will implement some process or what is different. So yeah, it's a good question.
For those that don't know, a SUMP is a Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. It's the transport planning strategy for a city.
Maybe, oh, sorry.
And we certainly would say that the UVAR will go in as part of the SUMP, as part of the many parts of the SUMP, and we kind of using a similar process. Lisa Marie?
Yeah, maybe I can add a little bit from a SUMP perspective, because I'm actually working a lot with SUMPs, and also we are supporting cities with SUMPs. And how we see it, it's the SUMP is the overall strategy, and other strategies should be integrated. So it's the umbrella for other aspects. And UVAR, if you want to implement UVAR measures, the best thing you can do is integrate them into the SUMP. So you should not have you don't have to have a million different strategies for different policy fields, measure fields, but there should be part of the SUMP, because then you can look at the whole system beyond UVAR together. You can see the effects together, because of course the UVARs don't just work alone. There are also other measures and impacts that happening together. And then things like evaluation and monitoring, target setting, scenario building are already part of the whole process. And I know that many cities struggle with monitoring, so this is already a step to also monitor the effects of the UVAR. It makes it easier. Maybe that helps a little bit for understanding the relations between it, but it's not always easy to understand. I know that.
Yeah. We have another question from Michelle de Robertis. Sorry, Michelle. About advice on how public participation fits in. We have a series of June webinars start every Tuesday in June. We have a webinar on the cross-cutting themes that you need to think about in any UVAR, and also in many other transport measures. And one of those is on public participation and how and when it adds in. It's a balance. If you it has to be the right amount at the right time, and trying to help support cities in how much is when. Do you want to go, Lisa Marie?
Yeah, when I was preparing that talk, I was also thinking about how it actually went, because it's not an easy question. But I think what we learned is you already have to work on something that is ready to be presented, because you have to know the answers when people ask. So in the beginning, we had a lot of meetings just with Bielefeld, and they had meetings in the city, and then we came in, and then we had a lot of brainstorming and development meetings of the building blocks. And when we were at a certain point, they were, okay, we need to involve the stakeholders now. So first, the stakeholders came in, and they had these stakeholder meetings. And when this process was developed further, and they knew a little bit better what they want and which measures they wanted, which building blocks, they brought in the citizens. And I think between us and the ReVeAL group and the stakeholder consultation, this was a very parallel process. And the results from the stakeholder consultation always fed into our discussions, but also the other way around. So I think it's very ongoing, and I think it will still be, because this pilot that they do in Bielefeld is also part of the participation, because they will evaluate how people like it. And this will again feed into our process of building the strategy for Bielefeld. So we can be lucky that Bielefeld has such a extensive process. It's a very interesting case for us, I would say.
Yeah. There is a talk on it. Bielefeld it had a brilliant website and a huge amount of stakeholder involvement. And one of the quotes from Oliver was, "We had surprisingly less negative press. We expected more negative press. It's quite a controversial issue." And his thinking was people were involved and were able to understand it and give their inputs constructive there, so they didn't need to say nobody talked to me and the negative press was very much reduced. So if that's an advertisement enough to join our June webinars, and also to look at the guidance notes that we are producing on these issues, please do so. We would like to again, there's no more questions. If we would like to again apologize for Kuz's sound. We've had so many web calls and it's never ever been a problem. But the next webinar, nobody's allowed to turn up without headset. If you'd like to, we would really appreciate you letting us know how we did and what we can improve. So there'll be an email coming around afterwards. So please do feed this in so we can help improve for the next ones starting June the 8th, every Tuesday in June. So that's that. Bonnie has circulated. Bonnie is our wonderful magic lady in the background doing all the background aspects, and she sent you the links. The presentations and the recording and questions and answers will be available on our website, and look forward to seeing you on the 8th of June.